I was validating, just trying to figure out what would cause the everything to turn on, but the video not have output when there's nothing really, obviously wrong. The next step was to get the logic analyzer out and start testing signals on the video chips and on the CPUs. And I noticed that one of my previous videos I had, set up to look at the HDMI output of a Copper Dragon FPGA video processing board, and I realized that my HDMI connection for this was still connected to that other the HDMI converter. So let's give it a try now and see what happens. Oh, there it is. It works. So for some reason this LED wasn't turning on initially, and my HDMI wasn't working. So there's a good chance that this computer was working the entire time. It just goes to reinforce that, you make sure your test setup is working and functional before you start testing a computer. So that's good news. I'm going to get this computer all cleaned up. I'm probably going to pull all the chips that I can pull and deaux the legs and sockets, and then eventually I'll probably recap this, at least recap all the electrolytic capacitors on this board, and then put it all back together and call it good. Call it another C128 restored and put back into functional service. So I took the case out and blew it off, took the motherboard outside, and blew all the dust out, took the keyboard, hit it with the air. I used this thing. It's a electric air. It's like a replacement for the canned air, so it actually creates a lot of air, and it's you plug it in. These are about 50 or 60 bucks. I think this is better because I with a lot of my projects I go through a lot of canned air, and that can get pricey after a while, and it always seems like I'm running out of canned air. So this kind of gives you a good unlimited supply of air to get dust out of stuff. This is the lower case. It actually cleaned up quite nicely. Also, the keyboard actually cleaned up really nice. Looks great. In fact, it looks probably the best out of any of my 128s. It's looked a little dirty to start, but it turned out to be really nice shape. Not much yellowing at all. Actually, no yellowing that I can see. So I just cleaned it up with just regular window cleaner, and it started me thinking that it seems like whoever you ask has a different story for how Commodore computers yellow and Apple computers yellow and why they yellow. And some people claim it's UV, and other people claim that it's not UV, that they've left things inside dark areas and they've still yellowed. So it started me wondering, like, maybe it's window cleaner. Could it be like your typical glass cleaner? I don't know, but there does seem to be a UV component to it from what I've seen. So I'm going to hit the cases with some of this UV protectant. It's stuff I got from my boat, but it's supposed to protect plastic from UV, so I figure it can't hurt on these old Commodore cases. And I'm going to put it back together. I'm probably going to leave this out. I'm going to save these, but I don't think they really serve a purpose. I think they're only in for FCC purposes. I've never noticed a difference between leaving these, putting these on, or leaving them off. Of course, maybe you would have noticed back in the analog TV days when if you turned on your TV or turned on your computer, Commodore 128, and you remove these, and then you suddenly started getting interference on your analog television. That's a possibility, but I suspect they're just on here for regulatory purposes from back in the FCC days. And you always hear the old Commodore engineers talk about their, getting their boards through FCC and getting them approved, and it kind of being a big deal. So that might have just been for that purpose. Plus, this is a metal shield, and this is just cardboard, and this is 40-year-old cardboard at this point, almost 40 years old, or 35-year-old cardboard. This is going to break down eventually, I would imagine. So I wouldn't want to, trust this thing. Maybe if I was really concerned about it, I'd put a piece of modern plastic in here. But not too concerned about it, so I'm going to just leave this off for now until, and of course keep this, but just going to leave it off, and I think everything should work out fine. So yeah, the board cleaned up really nicely. I'm going to clean off this old grease and then use thermal paste and pull these chips, do some deox on all the connectors. I'm probably going to clean this up. It looks like we have some rust going on the lid for the modulator. Looks like it's just the lid. So we'll get that cleaned up, and I'll look for any other areas of corrosion. There was some corrosion on here. I cleaned it off. It cleaned off nicely with some deox. Yeah, so I'll go get this all these sockets pulled and cleaned up and deoxed, and put it back together. I've gone through all the socketed chips and reseated them. I used deoxit on the sockets and pins, and so if there's any, so that should help remove any oxidation that may have occurred. I'm going to, for now, I cleaned off the old grease, and I'm going to leave the thermal grease off it for now until I get the board recapped. I'm going to, go through and replace all the electrolytic capacitors on the board. I don't know if I have all of them on hand, so I just need to go back through and determine that, and then I'll start that process. But for now, I'm going to do a full diagnostic test with the test harnesses here. So I'm going to use my backbit cartridge and put it into C128 diagnostic mode. So how you do that on a backbit cartridge is you hold down the button on the backbit cartridge while booting it up, and then you wait until the light turns off, and then you press it 3 times for C128 diagnostic. 1 time for dead test, twice for the Commodore 64 diagnostic. So I did 3 times, and it boots into C128 diagnostic mode. So let's let this run and see if there's any errors or issues with this board. I'm probably going to fast forward this because it will be fairly boring to watch this whole thing go through. Okay, so we're Okay, so we made it through the first diagnostic test. No issues found. I'm going to let it run for a couple more counts through a couple more tests. I'm not going to let it run too long because I don't have any heat sinks on these chips, and no heat shields. The heat shield not in place. But yeah, I'm just going to let it run a couple more times. I'm still kind of curious about this piece. It has a resistor, looks like a 1K resistor between the first and last pin on the cartridge port. This was installed when I received the computer, so if you have any ideas about what this might be, the purpose of this piece, let me know. So yeah, so far everything looks good. Like I said, I'm going to let this run a couple more tests through and then power it off and reinstall the heat shield and put the computer back together. So I have this Commodore 128 back together. Heat shields back on, cases all back together. It's connected to power. So let's give it one last test. Boots into Commodore Basic 7.0, 128 mode. And let's power cycle it and test Commodore 64 mode. So there we have it. An untested Commodore 128 that appears to be 100% functional.